Today's video is inspired by As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. This is a book that I listen to audiobook format while I run because I find that the experiences that I have, and I usually run in the evenings, experiences and the different things that I was doing all throughout the day seem to make even more sense when I listen to the audiobook. The information that he shares in there is so deep and profound that we recognize that what he's speaking to is something very deep and inherent within us. Now, I remember reading somewhere that his wife, Lily Allen, would say that James would never write about something unless he lived it thoroughly in experience. And I believe that's the energy and the intent behind the words that can be picked up as we read or listen to As a Man Thinketh. And one of the things that he was very adamant about is linking thought with purpose. So that's what we're going to discuss today, linking thought with purpose. So this is helpful for discovering your purpose, encouraging your purpose, and also living your purpose and expressing your purpose through a creative expression, entrepreneurship, life, being who you really want to be. So he starts off with this poem in which he says, "Mind is the master power that molds and makes, and man is mind, and evermore he takes the tool of thought and shapes what he wills, bringing forth 1,000 joys, 1,000 ills. He thinks in secret, and it comes to pass. Environment is but his looking glass." So I want to relate this over to Tuesday's video. And I want to tie this into the experience that I had. So I would go to this park, and I would run in this park. And as mentioned, for whatever the reason may be, this park seems to stimulate, it's an environment, certain insights, perspectives, intuitive wisdom from within, creative inspiration, creative imagination. And I would go there and I would listen to as well in the evenings while I would run to James Allen's As a Man Thinketh. And I did this for the last few years. Now, this quote here, environment is but his looking glass. We recognize that when a person really goes in and discovers and lives their purpose, they find themselves in certain environments that further affirm that purpose, and they feel at home there. Now, this is true for physical environments, experiences, relationships, friendships, and just about every area of your life. I always suggest going in and discovering what is it that you truly desire, what is it that you truly want, what is it that you truly love. So, applying the information in this book, it seems to stimulate a certain kind of thinking pattern which brings a person on the discovery of their purpose. And they know when they're really living their purpose. Now, in the earlier stages, it may be a desire or a hunch or an inspiration to try something new. And all of a sudden, the individual discovers something that they're interested in. And some of the reflections that I had while I was listening to As a Man Thinketh and I was running in the park was, are these elements, aspects, inherent within me? Did I always have them within me? Perhaps they were discovered really in childhood, and for whatever the reason may be, I didn't encourage it. And as I would reflect back on my past, I would realize that it was true. There were these certain desires, certain ways of expressing, certain aspects of my being that I feel I live now more so than ever before that were inherent within me and things that I was always interested in, such as public speaking, communication, innovation, entrepreneurship, technology. These were things that I was always interested in. One of my fascinations, actually, when I was a child, and I used to talk to other children about it, I would have conversations about psychology and how the mind works. And some of the responses that I would get is, you're thinking too much, or that doesn't make any sense. But I knew deep down inside that it really did make sense. And it took a while, throughout the journey of life to develop the confidence and recognize that those thought patterns, the ways of thinking, of how I understand the mind to work, how I understand reality to work, was further revealed in, for example, As a Man Thinketh, as he would articulate all these things. And I would also experience it in my life as I would continue expressing creatively in entrepreneurship and communication, in conversation, and any kinds of expressions that are based on really what we would call purpose, who you really are. So James Allen says, until thought is linked with purpose, there is no intelligent accomplishment. With the majority, the bark of thought is allowed to drift upon the ocean of life. Aimlessness is a vice, and such drifting must not continue for him who would steer clear of catastrophe and destruction. They who have no central purpose in their life fall an easy prey to petty worries, fears, troubles, and self-pityings, all of which are indications of weakness. So this resonates with me because I realize, in relation to what I just mentioned, that we always have a purpose within ourselves. We know what it is. However, there's certain kinds of thinking patterns that we seem to have identified with, perhaps, or we have learned from the experiences in life in which we form conclusions on how we believe ourselves to be and how reality works and how we relate to each other and our experiences and environments and circumstances and so forth. That seems to create unnecessary complexity and confusion in our mind. So I really believe that we're meant to think accurately. And thinking accurately, to me, is representative of living and thinking based on your purpose. It means the thing that you're doing right now, the goals and visions that you have, that you committed to, that you are inspired to see into fruition, are the ones that we want to be thinking from. So thinking thoughts related to it, and thinking thoughts of how to see it into realization. Now, that is what I believe he means by until thought is linked with purpose, there is no intelligent accomplishment. Because the reality is that we can think anything. Really, the power of this information is linking the most relevant thoughts over to the purpose at hand. And as mentioned, that in the last video, we receive these thoughts, the creative inspiration within. And I believe these thoughts were meant for us to see as contributions to our purpose, to see it all the way to completion, to see it in reality. In other words, we have ideas, hunches, inspirations, and all these different ways of being able to discover our purpose, to live our purpose. Recognize that this is an ongoing thing as well, because when I looked at my life, and there were earlier stages where I started to really listen to myself, I would find that whatever it is that I would commit to, I would be automatically engaged with it. And my thinking would change. And whatever it was would lay the foundation for the next thing. For example, when I was 17 years old, up until I would say about 19 years old, any part-time job I had or summer job that I had would be working in factories and warehouses. And I didn't realize how that would play a role at that time, but I found myself actually quite engaged in the work. Although there was others around me that didn't like the job, I found it kind of interesting that they had these systems in place, logistical systems that would distribute merchandise to retail locations. I found an interest in that. Now, later on, I ended up going into corporate IT, And then eventually, later on in my corporate IT career, I would say the last 4 or 5 years, I was involved with warehouse management systems and logistics-based technology and wireless networks to facilitate distribution. Now, that paved the foundation for starting my IT business. So I had a fascination for logistics. I had a fascination for engineering. I had a fascination for technology. I also discovered I had a fascination for how the mind works and communication. I remember in 2007, 2008, something like that, I was reading 2 books. One was a spiritual book, and one was a Cisco technology book, Cisco routing and switching book, because I was doing the exam. And I started to see the parallels between spirituality and the technology. And again, I would talk to others about this, and they wouldn't see it for whatever the reason. But I knew that it was there, and I could see it so distinctly. And I believe it, for me, was a discovery of my purpose. I would see all these connections. So the takeaway here is whatever you're doing right now, I believe that some way, somehow, it relates over to the next stage of your life, finding your purpose. Also, if you believe you have found your purpose or what it is that you desire to express, desire to create, I would also encourage you to look back at your past experiences in your life and the different stages of the journey, different skills that you acquired, different behaviors that you developed, different environments, people that have contributed, different beliefs that you have let go of, and beliefs that you have identified with, and cross-reference that all to what we discussed in Tuesday's video and see the relationship to how you were really meant to be. Really connecting back to this authenticity of who you are, which is why I believe we are born inspired. We are born with a purpose. We show up in this world with a purpose, that certain kinds of patterns of behavior and certain indications of a child's expression, which is revealed in what they're interested in, lays a foundation for what they're going to do in later stages of life. This is something that I speak to a lot of people about, more so today than ever before. So wherever you are, you can connect back and relate back to the past and relate it over to the now and then relate it over to the vision. Kind of like what we discussed in Sunday's video. I'll put a link in the description to that. So he says, a man should conceive of a legitimate purpose in his heart and set out to accomplish it. He should make this purpose the centralizing point of his thoughts. It may take the form of a spiritual ideal, or it may be a worldly object, according to his nature at the time being. But whatever it is, he should steadily focus his thought forces upon the object which he has set forth before him. So, what he's indicating is whatever is in front of us right now, whatever it is that we're doing, we want to really value that. And it seems from the valuing and engagement in the activity or the job or the experience in hand, through the valuing of it, we develop the ability to concentrate and really direct the thought over to a purposeful outcome. It could be something as simple as just complete this project from a place of flow. Just do my best at this job that I'm at right now until I make the step to go into another job. Or if you're starting a business and currently you're working in a job or you have a career, to find the lessons and find the experiences in that particular job that can translate over to the success in entrepreneurship. For example, in my corporate career, I learned a lot of things about the business world. I learned a lot of things about leadership. I learned a lot of things about communication and also managing myself, project management, and dealing with complexity, working with large teams, coordinating. I learned a lot of things that paved the road for the next phase, which was the entrepreneurial journey. And the entrepreneurial journey allowed me to transition into consulting in a way that I could relate back to all those experiences in my life. And I also believe that this YouTube channel was part of the natural progression of all those things. So when I reflect back on my stories and I share them with you, I realize that there's relatability in all of these things. Now, here's the interesting thing. When he says, they who have no central purpose in their life fall easy prey to petty worries, I recognize that I had many of these petty worries, fears, troubles, and self-pityings, which those aren't thought processes of who I really am. And I had to, on the journey of valuing each part of the journey and committing to it and allowing whatever it is that I was doing to be, and I do this a lot better nowadays than I did before, as a result of not identifying with this kind of thinking, but I released from this kind of identification to petty worry-based thinking, fears, troubles, and self-pitying-based thinking. And when he says are indications of weakness, we want to tie it into what he says here. He says this is the royal road to self-control and true concentration of thought. Even if he fails again and again to accomplish his purpose, and he puts in brackets, as he necessarily must until weakness is overcome, the strength of character gained will be the measure of his true success, and this will form a new starting point for future power and triumph. So it seems that the task at hand, where we are right now, is important because it helps us discern what is really true to us as far as our thinking goes and indications of our purpose. And it could be something, as he said here, a spiritual purpose or a worldly object, but whatever it is, you know what it is based on how you feel. So this is intuitively what you truly want, which may be distinct from what others suggest that you should want. So this is where we build a relationship with ourselves so that we can link thought with purpose. And so when he says, even if he fails again and again to accomplish his purpose, as he necessarily must until weakness is overcome, it's really the weakness in relation to identification of thinking patterns or what we're imagining as far as petty worries go, fears, troubles, and self-pitying. So it's, you can say, not these things, but our relationship to these things that seems to create unnecessary complexity in our thinking, which causes us to, as he says, drift upon the ocean of life rather than channeling our thoughts towards the purpose, the vision that we have. And no matter where we are on the journey, we can really commit to what it is. And if we feel intuitively so that that is not the place to commit to, then it's important to go within and ask yourself the question, because you will always receive the answer. Ask and you shall receive. What is it do I really want to do now? What is it that I'm really interested in doing? And although you might not know how it looks 20, 30, 40 years from now, you'll get an idea for the next thing. It could be something like a project, or it could be taking a big step in your life, making a bold move. And you'll know that thing because you will feel it intuitively. And perhaps when you feel it, right after that, you might experience petty worries, fears, troubles, self-pityings. It's important to recognize then that this is an opportunity for you to practice developing the power of concentration. Those kinds of thought processes, see them as opportunities that present themselves so that you can actually move through them. As we have said a number of times from Joseph Campbell, the cave we fear to enter holds the treasure we seek. So in order to live purposefully, which I believe is how we are really meant to live, we want to be able to move through the petty worries, fears, troubles, and self-pityings. So he says, the weakest soul, knowing its own weakness and believing this truth, that strength can only be developed by effort and practice, will, thus believing, at once begin to exert itself, and adding effort to effort, patience to patience, and strength to strength, will never cease to develop and will alas grow divinely strong. So as we've been saying, that we can look at this as the conscious use of the two gifts of speech and mind to direct our inner speech over to what we're doing right now in relation to our future, and also looking at our past as in harmony and in contribution to where we are right now. And if we need to make peace with certain aspects of our past, then I recommend doing it. And one of the best ways we can do this is working with the power of the subconscious mind. And I discussed these components in the almost 2-hour-long video that I did recently, 2022 Interpretations of the Power of the Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy. I recommend watching that. I'll put a link in the description. So, to discover our purpose, we have to value where we are right now. And recognize that when we value where we are right now, we have a greater ability to discern from the true thoughts, which are distinct from the petty worries, fears, troublings, self-pitying, and so forth, which perhaps we were identifying with and forming a self-image. One of our responsibilities is to release from that kind of thinking, and then we will discover the next step. And as mentioned, it could be a big step like leave the job and start the business, or do a project and see it all the way to completion. And we want to trust our intuition here, because that was one of the reasons why I released the video on Tuesday, to tie us in back to the feeling that we know the environment, the experience, the conversation, or whatever it is, when it shows up, some way, somehow, when we honor that, we feel it. It seems to open up the next door, because when we honor those, watch the video. This video on Tuesday, I'll put a link in the description to it. What happens is when we honor those things, it's like we free up our mind, or we release from certain kind of thinking patterns that seem to create bondage to the current circumstances. And then what we find is another way of doing things through a hunch, inspiration, or vision that shows up, the next step, which could be the next thing. And when you see it, you'll know that that's part of your purpose. So when he says, the weakest soul, knowing its own weakness and believing this truth, that strength can only develop by effort and practice, we're talking about presence and awareness to the things that show up each day, and not just allowing certain thought processes to drift into our mind and identify with them. Keyword is identify with them. If thought processes that are of petty worries, fears, and troubles and self-pitying seem to persistently show up in our mind, then I recommend working with the subconscious mind work so that we can change those beliefs and interpretations at a deep level. And so then they won't show up. And if they show up, they will be lighter, and we'll recognize that those aren't our true ways of thinking, and we'll let them pass, and we'll automatically or consciously identify with the thinking which is directed to the purpose, the project at hand, the goal, the vision. And to clarify your vision, I recommend watching that video I did in the start of the year to help craft your vision, your purpose. I'll put a link in the description to it. I recommend watching it. So he says, as the physically weak man can make himself strong by careful and patient training, so the man of weak thoughts can make himself strong, can make them strong by exercising himself in right thinking. So the right thinking is really being committed to the task or project or the goal or vision at hand all the way to completion, and to recognize that where you are is exactly where you need to be for this moment. It's a form of acceptance, and it doesn't mean that you would accept the current experience as a totality. What it means is it provides you an opportunity to direct your thinking, to be more present and focused on whatever it is, the project or the job or the task at hand. And from that acceptance, we start to receive the hunches and inspirations within. And then what happens is we know what we need to do next. And we take that step, whatever it is that we need to do next. And when we're about to take that step, we may be encountered by certain thought processes of petty worries, fears, troubles, and self-pityings. And there we have an opportunity to either release from those thoughts, just go back into a state of pure awareness, just let go of it, and move forward with that decision anyway. Or identify the thinking patterns that seem persistent, write them down, and do the subconscious mind work to release from those thinking patterns so they don't show up in a recurring fashion. Another benefit of doing this is going back to what I mentioned earlier. You'll connect back to different aspects of your purpose, because I believe that purpose might not necessarily be one thing. It could be a number of things, and it could span to different areas of your life. It could involve financial success, family, relationships, friendships, certain contribution and service to others. One of the commonalities we find in this is that purpose usually is tied into a service to others. As a person goes deeper into living the philosophy and applying this information, what they discover is their creative expression ends up being a service to others. Their artistic expression, their innovation ends up being a service to others. And that's how I believe James Allen really lived. And that's what is expressed here in As a Man Thinketh, and is one of the reasons why I keep listening to it over and over again, because I seem to understand it even more so because I realize this way of thinking is inherent within me. And if this resonates with you, then this kind of thinking also speaks to that deep part of you that really does want to make living the purpose, or sometimes I say, make flow the priority. To me, making flow the priority, living with purpose, they are very related and in contribution. So is the ideal state of mind, which I refer to regularly. So he says, to put away aimlessness and weakness, and to begin to think with purpose is to enter the ranks of those strong ones who only recognize failure as one of the pathways to attainment, who make all conditions serve them, and who think strongly, attempt fearlessly, and accomplish masterfully. So we recognize then that what we say as failure, or certain kind of thinking that we call petty worries, fears, troubles, and self-pityings, don't have power over us unless we identify with that thinking. And we have the opportunity to release from the identification from that thinking through practice. As he says, as the physically weak man can make himself strong by careful and patient training, so the man of weak thoughts can make them strong by exercising himself in right thinking, recognizing that he is not weak. He maybe just thinks of himself as being weak based on the thoughts that he is identifying with. So he goes on to say, thought allied fearlessly to purpose becomes creative force. So this is, again, another way of articulating what was shared in Tuesday's video. So let's look at it again. Thought allied fearlessly to purpose becomes creative force. He who knows this is ready to become something higher and stronger than a mere bundle of wavering thoughts and fluctuating sensations. He who does this has become the conscious and intelligent wielder of his mental powers. He says, having conceived of his purpose, a man should mentally mark out a straight pathway to its achievement, looking neither to the right nor to the left. Doubts and fears should be rigorously excluded. They are disintegrating elements which break up the straight line of effort, rendering it crooked, ineffectual, useless. He who has conquered doubt and fear has conquered failure. His every thought is allied with power, and all difficulties are bravely met and wisely overcome. So, this is about going in and making peace with certain kinds of thinking, recognizing that thinking, which is reactivity-based thinking, fear, doubt, indecision-based thinking, doesn't have to define who you are. And the opportunity is to look at those thought processes for what they really are, mere thought processes. You are transcendent to those thought processes. And our goal, should it be to discover and live the purpose, which is inherent, and you know what that is, and you can go on this journey and discover it more so. And when you know aspects of it, you'll know. And then you have the opportunity to encourage it by releasing from certain kinds of thinking patterns, which then allows you to identify with certain kinds of thinking patterns that are more in harmony with intelligent accomplishment or linking thought with purpose. That's what we really want to do. Because then we don't fall easy prey to those perhaps same thoughts of petty worries, fears, and troubles and self-pitying that we once fell easy prey to. Because then what ends up happening is we automatically mentally mark out the pathway to the achievement. We trust our intuition within. We're able to maintain that flow, that ideal state of mind. And to further contribute, I recommend watching my Flow series. And as a result, we'll be able to maintain this connection with true, accurate thinking in relation to our purpose, and further uncover and encourage even more aspects of our purpose as a person becomes autotelic, one with, living in Wu Wei, knowing what to do, what not to do, when to do, why to do, a deep level of flow. And that becomes a representation of conquering doubt and fear and failure, because then the thoughts are allied with the power that you have within you, which is what you say I am too, and the difficulties are bravely met and wisely overcome. And you find more joy doing this, and you embrace any challenges that show up, realizing that on the other side of that challenge is who you are meant to be, and further opportunities await you as a result of that internal growth and progression. So let's go ahead and conclude this with an affirmation and relate it over to the poem in the beginning. We can say, I recognize that mind is the power that molds and shapes reality. And through my mind, I have the power to think and identify with the thinking that discovers the purpose that is inherent within me. I realize that I was born with purpose. And my goal is to live my purpose more so every day, recognizing that environment reflects the degree of living in purpose in my relationships, in my profession, in my prosperity, in my environment, which is in harmony with the kingdom within, which was inherently mine, and now I live. If you would like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.